Debate only continues to get political. CNN's chief White House correspondent is under fire for taking White House press secretary's words out of context. Jim Acosta tweeted this: "The science should not stand in the way of this." If he could have only waited about 30 seconds, he would have heard what Kayleigh McEnany went on to explain. Take a listen.
The science is on our side here, and we encourage for localities and states to just simply follow the science, open our schools. It's very damaging to our children. There's a lack of reporting of abuse. There's mental depressions that are not addressed, suicidal ideations that are not addressed when students are not in school. Our schools are extremely important. They're essential, and they must reopen.
Well, let's bring in political commentator Bill Whittle to discuss with us. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. How are you, Lindsay?
Great. Well, you know, we see this get more political every day, it seems like. And obviously, you have Jim Acosta taking out of context. No surprise there for him. But, you know, it just makes me wonder, if we weren't in an election year, would we even be having this conversation? Would everybody just be on board together and be able to devise a plan to make our kids go back to school safely?
Yeah, I think in the unlikely event that Joe Biden wins in November, the COVID-19 crisis will end on the first Wednesday of November. That's going to keep going. But yeah, of course, the whole thing has been completely politicized pretty much from the beginning. And it's got to gall them that NBC Nightly News just asked five pediatricians, five experts, if we should send our kids back to school. And when all five of them said absolutely, one of them said yes, period, absolutely, you almost wanted like a slide trombone for the face on the anchor. You know, it was so disappointed that the actual doctors were saying that this is absolutely safe for younger kids.
You know, Bill, we're a month out, and the CDC was supposed to issue some kind of guidance for schools to go back. Is the federal government getting in the way of schools not? Because it almost feels like by the CDC postponing putting out guidance, they're giving an excuse to some of these localities to not announce what their deal is. But we're 30 days or less from a lot of these kids supposed to be going back to school, and school districts are using the CDC and saying, well, until we get guidance, we don't know what to do.
Well, it seems to me, Sean, that President Trump has been playing this pretty much in a federalist way in the traditional sense. He's basically letting individual states handle this COVID crisis. I think, you know, maybe a better question about whether or not it's safe for our kids to go back to school on some level, you kind of want to ask, do we want them to? Just to give you an example, the National Education Association, that's the biggest special interest group in the U.S., says that here's what the teachers in L.A. want, the United Teachers of Los Angeles. In order to go back to school and teach, they want charter schools to be shut down. They want the police defunded, Medicare for all single payers, health care. They want a statewide California wealth tax, which is not going to raise a lot of money because there's not much wealth left here in California. They want full funding for the homeless, financial support for undocumented students and their families, and then a big federal bailout. So when we talk about whether or not enough is happening on the federal level and whether it's Donald Trump or anybody who's in the way, the people who are in the way of kids going back to school are people like the unions, like the United Teachers Los Angeles, who basically have this entire agenda on the table saying we're not going to come back and teach until we get all of these things, defund the police, homeless housing, and so on.
It's a little bit crazy. You know, Bill, you actually recently had a video on your YouTube channel, and you had an interesting perspective on kids going back to school and going online, saying that actually there might be an upside to it because then you have teachers who can't so easily indoctrinate students with their liberal ideas. Do you think that this could be a sort of reform to teaching, because it's almost like having a teacher in the classroom in some ways?
Well, what it really is, I think, Lindsay, it's like having a parent in the classroom, and that's not something they particularly want. The number of stories of students, conservative students, who say that 2/3 of their mathematics class was talking about why you needed to go out and vote for Hillary Clinton. They can get away with this in classrooms, and they don't like people recording them in classrooms either. But if the entire school system is going to go online starting in the fall, then every single parent will be able to see what every single one of their students is getting all the time. And not only will they be able to monitor it, but you have to ask yourself if these extremely left-wing teachers are going to spend that kind of time on political issues when they should be talking about biology. So it could be actually a very good thing for us in terms of getting away from this indoctrination, which has been the entire strategy of the far left for 50 years now.
Bill, it's interesting that you pointed that out, because the thing that I think is interesting is that there was this medical study that came out in the publication JAMA, which is I think it's the Journal of American Medicine, that talked about the fact that children are more at risk of severe symptoms of the flu than coronavirus. The CDC reported 8 deaths of children 14 years or younger related to COVID-19, whereas there's been 169 cases of children dying because of the flu. Now, I'm not trying to diminish the impact of COVID, don't get me wrong, but you get my point. Is that day after day, you talked about those 5 doctors that were on NBC News. They all said it's safe, and yet it seems like there's some mysterious reason why these guys, after 6 months, still can't figure out a plan to put the kids safely back into the classroom.
Well, that statistic you just showed is interesting, for me anyway, in 2 reasons. First of all, this is an unusual virus in that regard. Usually viruses go after the very young. They haven't developed an immune system of any kind yet. But COVID-19 is essentially totally leaving young people alone, which is odd, but it's factually true, so there's that. But I think even bigger point, Sean, is the idea that all we're getting fed with COVID-19 is they're showing us the hits and they're not showing us the misses. They will say that, okay, 18 kids died of COVID-19, but as you pointed out, what was it, 169 for the flu? How many were killed in traffic accidents? How many were killed in domestic abuse? There's no frame around it. There's no perspective. All we see is here's how many people died of COVID-19, and we're needless to say, come to the conclusion that this is the only thing that's killing people out there. I'm not being flip about it. I know you're not either. But I really think from the beginning, if we're going to be mentioning the total numbers of death from COVID-19, we ought to at least have that bar, which is a new way to die thanks to the Chinese Communist Party. But that bar should also be next to a bar that shows here's how many people died of heart disease since January 1st. Here's how many died of cancer. Here's how many died of accidents, so that the American people can have some perspective on just how big a risk this is or isn't.
Yeah,
I was going to say that is actually crucial what you're saying, because right now everyone gets scared of it. And again, it doesn't mean you don't take precautions. It doesn't mean you do the right thing. But there's no perspective as to the risk of that versus saying, doing anything else in life that also has a risk. There's no perspective that the news media is sharing with folks.
That's exactly right. And we don't turn on the TV at 6 o'clock and see, Jim Davies from Live Action News down at LAX, where American Flight 462 from Dallas has landed without any problems whatsoever. They don't report on all of the airplanes that land safely, and obviously that makes sense. But nevertheless, if all you do is see reports of plane crashes, you will get a skewed idea of just how safe airplane travel is. And somewhere, somehow, somebody needs to be putting out that perspective. All of the good people are left out of the frame. All of the people who are doing good things and not protesting are outside of the frame, I think, intentionally. And that's a simple reason for that. And that is that good people are boring. And that's why we don't get the perspective that we often should get.
All right, well, you're a good person. You're not boring. I want to thank you for coming on the show, and I'm a big fan of your YouTube page. So thank you for being here and sharing your perspective.
Look forward to coming back sometime. See you soon.
All right.
You bet.
Well, we've been loving all the great feedback that you've been sending our way, so thank you for that. But now it's time that we get to know you. Newsmax wants to hear your voice so we can continue to improve. You can participate in our online survey, and don't you worry, responses are anonymous, but you can go to newsmax.com/411, and your response will help us understand our viewership as a whole here at Newsmax, and it will help us give you the kind of programming that you want to see. All right, well, up next, we're speaking with the president of the ZOA, who created a hotline for reporters being bullied by supporting the Jewish community. What he has learned, that the nasty fallout between Bari Weiss and the New York Times, right after the break.